Hello and welcome back, everyone. My name is Kimberly Carey. I am the owner of So Sassy Stitcher in Northwest Arkansas. I apologize for my voice on this video. My whole household has been fighting a cold. So I have been spending part of the day doing my mountain meadow. This is block 3 or month 3. So we have a big block and 3 spacers this time. We don't have a big block and a little block like we have had the past 2 months. Again, this is a kit that I got from the Stitch and Snip in Garden Valley, Idaho. And it is a couple of years old, but it is a very pretty one. And so I'm doing it on my own. For month 3, I changed up quite a bit of stuff in this one. There are a lot of half square triangles and some quarter square triangles in this one. And so I do them a little bit differently than what their instructions are. So I'm going to give you what I did and let you know why. You can do it the way that the instructions say. There's nothing wrong with that. I just prefer to trim my blocks up so that I know that they're nice and square and not wonky. So I give myself a little bit of extra, and it is easier for me to cut an even amount versus a 7/8 amount. I really don't like 7/8 or 8s in particular. And so the lines on the rulers are just better for cutting 1/4 inch increments versus 1/8 inch increments. So this is what I did on mine. I went through and marked which ones were for the quarter square triangles and which ones were for the half square triangles. So let me zoom in here for you so maybe you can see my notes a little bit better. Here we go. So for fabric number 1, I cut 9 inches instead of the 8 3/4. I probably could have only gone up 1/8 of an inch. That would have given me enough to be able to trim that up. But again, I don't like 1/8 inch, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pull that up to 9 inches. 1/4 inch isn't gonna make that big of a difference. That is a quarter square triangle. I do go ahead and cut those twice diagonally so that I have smaller triangles for those. And part of the reason why we do that is where our bias is going to land on those, because we can't just make a triangle, cut strips and make a triangle that's like this, because then all of this would be on bias. By cutting them diagonally, then this is on the bias, which makes it putting these seams together is a little bit better. So we can't just cut strips and cut these out. And then that 1 5.5 inch square is still correct. Fabric number 2, I bumped that up to 5 inches. That is for a half square triangle. And again, I'm doing that so that I can trim them up when I'm done. And those half square triangles, I don't cut in half. I'm going to go ahead and stitch those together, and I'll show you that before I cut them in half. It makes it a little bit less wonky, because even though we're sewing on the bias, it doesn't stretch as bad when it's together. Those 3x3 squares we're going to put aside for the border. Fabric 3 is the same. It's a 3x3 square. That's part of our spacer. Fabric 7 is the same. We've got our border 3x3s, and then we have just some 4.5 inch squares, which is, we don't do anything else with them. They're just that 4.5 inch. They're going to go in our big block. Fabric 8, I went ahead and bumped these up to the 5.5 inch instead of 5 1/4. Again, I'm cutting those twice for those quarter square triangles. And then instead of the 4 7/8, I'm bumping that up to 5 inches. And I am not cutting those. Those are for those half square triangles. Keep the 4.5 inch squares as well. Fabric 10, again, I'm bumping those up to 5 inches, not cutting those diagonally. I took that off. Fabric 12 is the same. Fabric 13, again, those are those quarter square triangles. I bumped that up 1/4 inch, so I'm cutting those 5.5. The 4.5 stay the same. Fabric 18 is the same. Fabric 19, I'm bumping that up to a 9 inch square again for that quarter square triangle. The 3x3 square is the same. Fabric 20, again, bumping that up to 9 inches, cutting it in diagonally twice. Same with fabric 21. Fabric 23, I'm leaving in those 3x3 squares. And then fabric 25, again, it's that quarter square triangle. So I'm bumping that up to those 9 inches. So that is my differences in the cutting instructions for this particular block. Now, if we look at the rest of our instructions here, our half square triangles. So the way that they want you to do half square triangles is you take your square and you cut it in diagonally once, and then you sew these pieces together. Okay, what happens when you do that is now I have this bias that I'm sewing along, and its biases are stretchy. And so when I do these blocks, instead of cutting them first, I sew them first. So I take, this is a Fons and Porter Omni Grid ruler. I have 3 different sizes of these, and they have this line that's highlighted in yellow down the center, and then it's a 1/4 inch on either side of that highlighted mark. So I just put this in the center so that that highlighted line goes through my corners, and then I mark either side of it. And now I have my 1/4 inch to either side of that. So it's the same thing that I would be sewing if I had already sewn this apart, but now I'm not having it stretch so bad in my sewing machine and having it get really wonky. And then I throw this on the iron, under the iron before I cut it, just to smooth that out a little bit. And then I'm going to take my ruler, and now at this point is when I cut it apart. Okay, so all I'm doing is I am sewing before I'm cutting in order to avoid that bias stretch. Now from here, because I oversized these, what I can do is I am going to take my square up ruler. This is Quilt in a Day. There's a bunch of different brands of these, but I have Quilt in a Day. I'm going to take, I know that these need to be 4.5 inches. They're going to be a 4-inch finished, but for right now, I need 4.5 inches. So on my Quilt in a Day ruler, I look at the 4.5. I have whole sizes on this side. I have half sizes on this side. So this dotted line at 4.5 goes on my stitch line. Okay, and I want to make sure that it's there. And if I'm worried about it being a little undersized or anything, I'm going to put that dotted line just that side of the stitch line. But where I'm trimming it up, it should be right on the money. Okay, and so I've got that lined up, and now I can just give this a quick little trim. And you can see it's not much that I'm trimming off, but it is enough that it is going to be nice and square, and it's not going to be wonky at all, and I'm not going to be fighting that in my bigger block. Because whenever you work with triangles, they just stretch because we're working on the bias. So no matter how careful you are, you're going to get a little bit of wonkiness. And then I can iron these open, and I'm going to iron this one open towards the gray side. So I just do that with both of these, and then I have my half square triangles that I then can put into my block. Now, for my 1/4 square triangles, so I had the bigger block that I then did my 2 cuts on diagonally. And so then I end up with triangles that look like this. And I'm going to put them together, and I'm going to sew along, not along this bias edge, but along this edge here. Okay. Then I'm going to iron this open, and I ironed towards the darker side because that's what I generally do, is I generally iron towards the darker side unless there's a good reason not to. With these, because we cut them diagonally, this shouldn't be the bias, but it's still a little extra stretchy than what it would be if I had just cut this triangle. So just be aware of that when you're sewing. You don't want to pull and distort that triangle. So then I've got all these blocks like this, but I need a quarter square triangle. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip this around like this, okay? And by ironing towards the same color, now I have opposite facing seams. So when I flip this over, my seam is going to nest together, just like that, okay? And then I'm going to stitch along here like this. Now you can throw a pin in here. When I have these seams that are opposite that nest super well like this, I generally don't need to pin because it's gonna, if I hold this as I put it into my machine, it's gonna stay right there. That's the fantastic thing about them. Okay, and then when I have that stitch, so you can see my stitch line here, again, making sure that I don't pull this at all as I feed it through my machine. I want it to be nice and neutral as I feed into my machine. Then, and you can see my center there is perfect. They meet up just right. And I didn't have to pin that at all because I had those nesting seams, or snuggle seams as some people call them. Then when I open this up, the instructions say to iron this open. Y'all know that I do not like open seams like that. And so what I'm going to do on this one is I am going to twist this seam. So I'm just going to pop those couple of stitches and I'm going to make the seams go in opposite directions. Okay, and then once I iron this out, it's going to lay nice and flat for me. As you can see, I've already put this one in my line, but it lays nice and flat, having that twisted seam. Okay, that's what I prefer because I really am not a fan unless I absolutely have to have those open seams. I don't like those because my seam is not as stable that way. And it can cause more holes in your top, especially when you're quilting, and especially if you have a quilter or if you quilt yourself, if you like to stitch in the ditch, it's going to create more, you're going to potentially pop some of those stitches out, and that's not going to work well for you. So those were the smaller quarter square triangles. These big quarter square triangles, we're doing exactly the same. They're just larger. And so that's what we're going to end up with, is just a larger version of that. But we're doing it exactly the same way. Again, I'm going to pop those seams. So these seams are going to go basically in a circle. And so when I just make them go the opposite direction, I might have to pull just a little bit. Those few stitches are going to pop right out so that that lays down nice and flat for us. So I'm going to get those ironed open for that. This one is not super complicated. We do have those half square triangles and those quarter square triangles. I know what I was going to show you guys. With our quarter square triangles, I am going to trim these up, okay, before I iron them open. Again, this is going to be 4.5 inches, so I can still use my square up ruler. And again, I'm putting that 4.5 inch red dotted line right on my lower seam. But now what's going to happen is this solid line, that's the center line, it is going to go right down this center seam like that. And what that's going to do, see if I can get it lined up just right. Okay. And so what that's going to do is it's going to put your center in the center. Okay. So that this piece here is in the middle of your block and it's not off to one side or the other. We have to make sure that we're trimming it up equally. Okay. Now, one thing that I will say is sometimes our stitches are not perfect. I am not perfect. Okay. So what I want to do is, if there's a little bit of wonkiness to your block and things don't line up exactly perfect, this one's pretty good, split the difference. The biggest thing is that I want to try to make sure that my corners, my 3 corners here are on that line, okay? If it varies a little bit through here, I'm not gonna get super worked up about that. But if I don't have this lined up right, then every seam that it connects with, it's not gonna line up right. So that's the biggest thing, is I wanna make sure that these edges are correct. Okay, so then once I have it in place, then I can trim this up just like that. And then I will take it to the ironing board from there. The other thing that I can do when I trim these up, whether it's my half square triangles or my quarter square triangles, is once I have this trimmed up, then I'm just gonna trim up my edges like that so that I don't get those dog ears that I would normally have. Like if I open, this one I haven't trimmed up yet. If I open this guy up, then I've got these dog ears right here. And so by doing this trick, then I've eliminated those dog ears. This one is my 8.5 inch block. So it's gonna be the same, I think it's 8.5, no, it's 8 inch finished block. So I'm gonna do it the same way. I've just flipped my ruler around to have those solid, or the even ones, the whole numbers. And then again, I'm going to place my middle seam, or my middle line, on that middle seam here, making sure that that corner matches up. And then making sure that this corner and this corner match up along that stitch line. That's the biggest thing. This one looks pretty good. There's a tiny bit of wonkiness right in here, but it's not bad. Barely noticeable. So I'm also going to trim this guy up just like that. Again, it's not much. If I had gone up 1/8 of an inch increment, I would have even less, but really, I mean, that's 1/8 of an inch that I'm trimming off there. And so it's well worth it to me, just to have that little bit of extra so that I can make sure that my block is trimmed up quite nicely. And then I can throw this under my ruler, or under my iron, and get it ironed nice and flat, spinning those seams on the back, okay? And then we end up with a block just like this. Again, I have those seams going in a circle. I've popped that so that it lays nice and flat, so that when I go to quilt that, I don't have this big bump, but I also don't have open seams that are gonna cause me trouble. So that's how I do my quarter square triangles. Now you can see I have this my block laid out. I'm working on getting these pieces together, and then I'll lay my last one out now that I have the rest of those blocks done. And then it just goes together like any other block, because I have 4.5 inch squares to work with, and it goes together just nicely. When I'm putting these guys together, I made sure that they were opposite. So on this one, I iron towards the gray. On this one, I iron towards the teal, so that when I put those together, I have a snuggle seam here, and then I don't have a lot of bulk in those triangles. This one, however, because I did not iron these open, I do have a little extra bulk here, but it's totally workable. All right, then you're just gonna work on your spacers. The spacers are pretty easy. Basically, you're just going to have some squares you put together, you put on the bigger square, and then I'm going to attach that to these guys, okay, in the direction that it shows on there. So those are pretty easy once you have those quarter square triangles done. So really, it's just a matter of doing your half square and your quarter square triangles, trimming them up. But this at least gives you some optional cutting instructions. Now, the other thing that I don't like about this, there are other rulers, quarter square triangle rulers and things like that, that you can use to actually make your quarter square triangles more efficient. Fabric wise, is on some of my larger quarter square triangles, I only use half of the triangles to make the quarter square triangle blocks. So I have some triangles left over. Hopefully we will use them in future blocks. Otherwise, it's a little bit of a waste. And for me in the future, I'm going to look into a better way to do that so that I don't have that waste there. But I hope this helps you out. Happy quilting on Mountain Meadow, and I will see you again in April for block number 4.